Hi, everybody. We are actually, yes, our competitors are underway. So it's good that we are here today for our session, which is called Management for Energy Efficiency, Making a Good Thing Even Better. Okay, so I love this title. This is a great title. I think Jim came up with it. Thank you, Jim. So let's talk, what do we mean by management for energy efficiency? Just want to say a couple of brief things just to sort of whet your appetite. But, you know, in 2012, you look at U.S. energy use and you add up the percentage just for industry and commercial buildings together, you get 50% of U.S. energy use. So it's a pretty important area. If you look at most organizations, energy use is in the top 5 of your operating expenses, and in many organizations, it's in top 3. So, and that's not even really thinking about the full value chain of the energy that goes into creating goods and services. So, which will, of course, go outside of U.S. boundaries in a lot of cases. So that's kind of a big picture on what's the energy role for organizations and in the public sector. But if we then think about why is it a good thing to manage energy for both public and private interests, right? Well, if you can have economic output for less input, say operating costs or energy, that's what we like to call productivity. This is a good thing, okay? So we want productivity for industry, we want productivity from public policy. What do we think about when we say we're using less energy in our value chains? Well, that means that we are less vulnerable to disruptions in those value chains. That's resilience, that's a good thing. Other things that are good about less energy use, less externalities, less impact on your neighbors, less impact on public health, the ecosystem, climate, et cetera. So if that's a good thing, why do we want to talk about making it better? What goes into that? That means we're talking about change. Change involves time. Change involves skill. Change involves knowledge. And we are lucky here today to have 3 people who I think embody knowledge and skill and not that much time, but who can talk to the broader trends. So our first speaker is going to be Jim Sweeney, our director of the Pre-Core Energy Efficiency Center. He's an accomplished professor of management, science, and engineering. He's going to be talking about the big picture of energy and how that change has occurred over time already. It helped to send some of those bigger trends. Then we're going to have Richard Hart. He's the practice lead for transformation services at Enernoc. He's an expert in organizational change management. He's worked in many different sectors to look at energy and other sustainability issues, including commercial real estate, financial services, batch process manufacturing, healthcare, government, et cetera, et cetera. So this is going to be a lot of really interesting expertise that can kind of bridge a lot of different organizations with that skill and that knowledge. And then we have Bill Mitchel. He leads Microsoft's government and business development for cities and sustainable solutions. And he's going to be able to speak to us particularly about organizational change management in the actual practice within Microsoft. He's also, of course, got a broader set of interests because of the work he's been doing with cities and sustainable solutions in general. So he'll be able to talk about what they've done to manage energy use at Microsoft, and we can see a little window into how knowledge and skills can go into action in an organization. So the ground rules, 15 minutes for each speaker. We're going to do about 25 minutes of Q&A at the end. Please think about your questions. We've got the microphone right there in the middle, and I think it's going to be a really dynamic and interesting opportunity to have these experts here. So, enough said. Jim Sweeney, you've got the floor. You want this?
Yeah, thank you. I've always wanted to feel like a rock star. Want to call this talk, energy efficiency, the good, the bad, and the real. And I want to do it basically in that order. Margaret talked about some of the good. Energy efficiency has been good for the economy, security, and the environment. We all know that. We all know that what's always said is that energy efficiency appears to be the lowest cost option for incremental incremental changes in the economy. Great opportunity So that's what we hear, but what's the bad? Well, the bad is that there's still many opportunities that people aren't taking advantage. You hear Dan Arvizu talking about why we're not moving as rapidly as you'd like to see. There are structural, behavioral, and market power issues, and fixing these problems generally has not been easy. The academic research has identified a lot of barriers as to why we don't get as much energy efficiency as seems to be optimal. There's institutional barriers having to do with information and the structure of industries. There's market failures with principal agent problems, transaction cost externalities. There's behavioral issues of having to do with information. That's not what I want to talk about today. I want to talk mostly about the reality. The reality, and I'm going to start with a statement that you may not automatically agree with at the beginning, that energy efficiency has been more important in shaping U.S. supply-demand balance, including imports, since the oil crisis than all of the supply options put together, including fracking for natural gas, fracking for oil, wind, solar, geothermal, and ethanol. So that's, at the end of the day, if you're convinced of that, then I will have been successful. But most of these changes are pretty invisible. We don't see them. For outsiders, outsiders don't see them, and often insiders don't see a lot of these changes. And because you can't easily measure aggregate energy efficiency, it's hard to observe what the changes have been without asking some but-for world, what would have been happening otherwise. Dan Arvizu can tell you, here's how much solar we're generating in each country. It's a good number. How much energy efficiency we've got depends upon figuring out what would have happened absent the energy efficiency. And finally, because energy efficiency has been the result of a lot of cumulative small changes, some of which look really boring, nobody really tends to give there's quite excitement about what's happening in energy efficiency. So to bring these points, I want to bring you back to the time of the 1973 oil crisis. And you all remember the oil embargo, the gasoline line. Some of you don't remember it. I remember it. There's a group of you that do. Yeah, but some of you don't. At that time, this is the total use of energy. It was growing right along with the economy. Lockstep was the words that were used. This was domestic production. See that little purple? No, you probably don't. That's nuclear. The green is renewables, and that was it was over half hydropower. The rest of it was wood combustion. That was renewables, and the gray was the imports. Imports were growing at the time. The oil prices jumped from $2 a barrel to $11 a barrel in dollars of the day. It was a shot across the bow, and it really created a lot of attention. Going up to that time, the energy was growing right along with the economy, minus about 0.5%. This is data going from the year 1950 to 1973. Oops. You can draw either one of those curves. It's about 0.5% a year difference. You can actually go back to about the year 2010. Year 1910 to 1973, and you'll see the average rate of decrease was 0.5% a year, and the ratio of energy to the economy. So as business expanded, they used just more energy. As people got richer, they drove more, they got bigger houses. Nobody paid any attention to energy they paid attention to overall costs, and so there was technological progress that reduced the use of everything, but there's nothing special about energy. That's what I call the no energy efficiency world, following that path. So then, so what would the forecast? Yeah, let me do this differently. So what were the expectations at that time? You go back to the Project Independence report, federal government report in '74, and the expectations from all of the different forecasters was a continued growth in the use of energy consistent with what you've had in the past. So what would have happened if we had this no energy efficiency world where we continued growing the use of energy? If you take, this is reality, the red is the overall growth of the economy, and I've subtracted 0.5% a year growth rate. That's what would have happened if we continued in this path of not focusing at all on energy efficiency. These were the forecasts. National Petroleum Council was more aggressive. This was a forecast that you're seeing right along that trend. At that time, then, the federal government, President Nixon declared Project Independence. He wasn't around very much longer afterwards, but President Ford then continued on, and the government said, look, there's 3 things you could do. Base case, you could do nothing. We just keep doing what we've done in the past, ignore this energy crisis. We can accelerate the supply so as to reduce the imports. We can have what they call the energy conservation strategy, which I'd call an energy efficiency strategy, and we can prepare for emergencies. Or more reasonably, we'll do all of the above. And that was the first all of the above strategy that came at that time. So what actually happened? That's what actually has happened in energy efficiency as opposed to what we would have had without it. This is the energy use in the economy. And if you look at the energy use per unit of GDP, before the crisis, where we had no policy, about 0.5% a year, we had the energy crisis, and the prices were allowed to flow through to the economy. Firms started innovating differently. People started paying attention to energy. When they created new products, energy wasn't the only thing on the mind, but now it was a factor in their mind. There were government policies put in place, and this ratio was declining 2.7% a year until oil prices dropped in the mid-'80s, and a lot of the policy attention disappeared. So after that point, the decline rate was about 1.7% a year. These are actually pretty small numbers, percentage per year. It's sort of like watching your child grow. Small change each year, and the first thing you know, you get a bill for college tuition, and all of a sudden you say, maybe they grew up a lot in this case. So what's the difference of what we had in '73? We had 14,000 BTUs per dollar of GDP. Now we have 6,000. That's been a lot of the effect of energy efficiency. Not all of it, but most of it has been energy efficiency. So that's sort of the effect. That's about 80 quads difference from what we would have had in the world in the past before we started focusing on energy efficiency. So you can ask, what's happened? Dan Arvizu said, we're now not growing in the use of energy. We're using the same amount of energy as we used in the year 2000, but the economy's grown 28%. Some people call this decoupling. That's absolutely wrong. There is no decoupling. When the economy goes down, energy use goes down. When the economy goes up, rapidly, energy use goes up. When a corporation expands, they use more of everything, including more energy. What is going on right now is the rate of aggregate energy efficiency throughout the whole economy is a small percentage, 2 or 3% a year. And that is just about equal to the average rate of growth of the economy. So we have 2 things competing with one another, giving us net on net no use of energy, the economic growth, and then the energy efficiency, about 0.5%. Now, I want to be careful about my definition of energy efficiency because it's different from what a physicist would use or an engineer. Physicists or engineers say reduction in the amount of energy used to accomplish the same work. I talk about economically efficient reductions in energy use. So if you're telecommuting and you didn't have to fly and you used a lot less energy, the physics definition doesn't call that energy efficiency. The economist does. Same if a company redefines what it produces to be using a lot less energy efficient product, but still profitable, I call that energy efficiency. A physicist wouldn't. So where does this happen? Everywhere. And Margaret, can you tell me when I'm getting close to the end, and then I can start ignoring it? This is the industrial sector, which is what we're focusing on today. Notice here was a trend. The discontinuity of 75 is we now use about the same amount of energy in the industrial sector as we did in 1975. Transportation sector, discontinuity. Residential sector, commercial. There is the discontinuity across the whole economy. If you look at, so some people would say, well, that's because of China. Our industrial sector has plummeted. Wrong. This is the growth of industrial production, the Fed industrial production industry. Our industry is growing. Now, it wasn't during this last downturn, but then it's growing again. And of course, energy use went down sharply during the downturn in the economy. But notice this is a flat use of energy with a significant growth in the industrial sector. How much time do I have?
1 minute.
1 minute. Okay, I'll be quick. So if you say, well, look here's what the residential, industrial, transportation sector just is what's happening in the U.S. That's this sector. Industrial sector, you can say there's international competition. So you can look at this energy use per unit of GDP for these two sectors. Pre-industrial crisis, industrial was already improving. The other sectors were hardly improving at all. During this time of high prices and a lot of innovation, significant reductions in the increase in the rate of decline for each sector. And then afterwards, reduction in both of the sectors. The pattern is across the board. So if you look at the effects, this is about those three sectors, about 35 quads different, about 45 quads in the industrial sector from what I claim was dominantly energy efficiency, including redefinition of what the products were, redefinition of how you ran the products, redefinition of managerial processes. And I just want to end up with this examination of the supply side. Here, that's energy efficiency impacts. You see the supply side. This is coal, increased and went down. This is what we get from natural gas and the oil fracking. This growth from what we've had in it, we've now caught up to where we were in 1973 in those sectors. Nuclear has gotten large. Wind, geothermal, and others count for maybe less than 10 quads. So we're talking about changes here that are maybe in the order of 20 quads, where in the demand side, that energy efficiency has been about 80 quads worth of change. Boring stuff, very small. Across the board, you don't see it because it's happening in every single company, every single family, but they're not doing it often for energy. It's mostly for profitability. But now energy costs more. And technology is available that's allowing you to do things. And regulations are out there. And those collectively together have led to the story of energy efficiency, which most people don't pay attention to as having a large amount of impact. But if you look at the aggregate statistics and understand you got to draw a benchmark of what you would have had without this, this is really not only has been but continues to be the most profound effect on supply and demand balance. I'm going to move from there and stop and let it move to one of the people, Richard Hart.
Great.
Yeah, it's a wimpy one.
I'll use this, yeah. I'm back. So the question is, how do I go from here? Do you have any idea how I actually get to my slides?
Okay.
That's an interesting question. There you go.
Probably exactly.
Yeah, that's perfect. There we go. Does that work? All right, great. So let's do a quick exercise. I'm going to go from Jim's really high-level national perspective to a very micro, practical, in-your-organization perspective. So before we do that, I just want to do a quick check with everyone in the room here. Put your hand up if the organization that you work for has a well-defined sustainability or energy goal. All right, we're doing well here. Keep them up, keep them up. All right, now keep your hand up if you're aware of a concrete plan to achieve that goal. All right, doing well, perfect, okay. Now keep your hand up if you're aware of a team that is assigned to actually achieve that goal and meets on a regular basis. Wow, okay, excellent, excellent. Now keep your hand up if your team is supplemented by extensive employee engagement in energy efficiency. All right, we're getting a few less hands on that one. Okay, very good. Okay, so we have in the room a number of people whose organizations are committed to a goal and are well on the way to achieving that goal. At least they have the organizational pieces in place. This is not the case for everybody, right? So we're also seeing, I see a lot of people who don't have clear goals for energy management. You walk in the organization, and maybe many of you are familiar in the people who didn't have their hand up, we don't have clear goals. Or we have, now this is a very common situation, we have a goal, but we really have no idea how to achieve it, right? So I see that a goal that came down from a sustainability effort, and unfortunately did not end up in actual achievable plan. This is a big one too, our teams aren't coordinated, right? So we don't really have a team that is able to execute the plan that we have in place. And then finally, well, you know, we have a team, but it's really a facility team. It's a local, small team, and employees are not really involved in the effort. So what I'm going to talk about today is sort of rectifying that situation. We're going to talk about very specific activities. I'm not going to get through all of my slides, but I think the deck is going to be available on some website somewhere, so you can look it up if, or I'd be happy to send you the deck afterwards if you come up to me afterwards. All right, so this is the situation that's actually in many organizations in terms of trying to achieve the goal, which is equipment. Now, Jim was talking about what the results of energy efficiency have been across all sectors in the economy. A lot of that has actually come from equipment changes, right? So you can think of it in the organization that you work for. It might be a simple thing like your copiers are much more efficient. You think about your residents, your fridges are much more efficient than they used to be. And at the industrial sector, fans, pumps, and so forth are much more efficient than they used to be. And so a lot of people are able to focus on that, and it sort of goes to what Jim's point was. I walk into a room, I walk into a facility, I see that this piece of equipment here has been swapped from its old to the new. It's a direct impact, and I have some ability to measure that impact somewhat directly. I can say it used to use 100 kilowatts, now it uses 80 kilowatts. So that's its power draw. If I have some sense of how that power moderates over time, I can say I expect if usage is 1-to-1, I've saved 20 kilowatts or 20 kilowatt hours every hour on that particular item. So that's great. Now, the result is that we've seen a lot of work in that area, and engineers love this kind of thing, and they're very effective. But the measurement is sometimes lacking, right? So the question is, when it's not simply about swapping out equipment, what is really the options at that point? What can one do? You need to have good information, you need to have good data, and the selection, the ability to actually get good data in your hands and manipulate it, understand what's going on in the organization, has been somewhat limited. Jim mentioned the improvement in technologies. My company and many companies like ours are out there with all kinds of different offerings, and I'm sure, Bill, you can talk to this as well. The availability of information, the availability of the tools to analyze what's going on has vastly improved. Now, the thing is, though, you can have the equipment availability and you can have the data, but what is driving that? What is driving the uptake of the information that's available? What's driving the uptake of the equipment? It really is strategy, right? And this is where, as Margaret was saying, it starts to get a little more tricky. This is where goals need to be clearly stated. This is where numeric objectives start to come into play. This is where you need to have teams that are assigned to achieve the goals that have been set for the organization. And this is where this is the area that I work in directly. And so let's think about this from these guys' perspective. Okay, so we have a great success. Go Warriors! All right. I live in Oakland. It's huge. We just we were blue and yellow all over. So. There's some people missing in this diagram here, namely the MVP of the series. But nonetheless, all that being said, what do we learn from this? What do we learn from these guys that helps us, that tells us how to do this work better, this kind of energy efficiency work better in our own organizations? Well, first of all, they start the season, they got a goal, they're going to win the championship. All right, that's very clear. They have a very clear goal in mind. Now, the second thing is, well, how do you measure your success towards that goal? What kind of metrics do you use? An obvious metric is going to be win-loss. All right, did you win? Did you lose? Very simple. But it's kind of a trailing indicator, right? At the end of the game, you know whether you won or you lost. What do you come into the game measuring? All right, Steve Kerr, the coach of the Warriors, is a huge measurement guy. He's looking at a lot of different statistics. I am no basketball fan. You can tell by my accent, kind of not really the country of great success in basketball. But nonetheless, he's looking at a lot of different statistics out there. Rebounds, various passing statistics, leading indicators that tells him, is the team getting better at basketball throughout the season, regardless of the win-loss ratio. So they've got a goal, and they've got metrics, right? They have a way of measuring all of these things. Lots of statistics are being generated. So not only are they creating metrics, but they're actually able to measure success. They're also very focused on continuous improvement in those metrics. Like 2 weeks before the end of the season, the team is clearly going to the playoffs, no problem. Steve Kerr is still saying, you know what, I'm still not happy with some of the measurements that I'm seeing, right? I'm still not content with this team at this point. So they have not only a goal and not only metrics that they can use, but they're also focused on continuous improvement in those metrics. They understand what they're measuring, and they understand how to improve, and they have a focus on that improvement, right? Again, not as sexy as the big solar array on the top of your building, right, to change metaphors a little bit, but not as sexy as the big stem or the Tesla battery pack that's in front of the building. No, not as sexy as that, but nonetheless, continuous improvement, and these guys, obviously, very successful. The other thing is, of course, it was a team effort, right? So this is really a team that worked together, unlike the people who lost the championship. So this is really, these guys all really played well together, right? They were really focused on not necessarily promoting one star at the expense of everybody else, right? If you saw them throughout the season, various people just played up to different levels at different games. So it was definitely a team sport, and energy efficiency is really a team sport. So this was another aspect that you can learn from this very successful franchise. Let's move on to a couple of other items here. So if we bring this down to what's actually happening in organizations around energy efficiency, right? So you need to have the people side of this, right? We can translate from the basketball. You need to have Steve Kerr. You need to have the team that's in place. You need to have surrounding the people on the court. You need to have a whole slew of people who are providing coaching support. And so you see this kind of, the successful organizations are moving ahead on all 5 of those blue areas there, right? On the right-hand side, process, absolutely critical. So you can't just have the people if you don't have the people aligned around a process for energy efficiency. We see this with clear plans, right? You have to have a plan. You have to have a plan at a high level, and also a detailed action plan, right? What are you doing over the next month that is going to help you achieve the goal? O&M controls, what kind of controls are you doing for operations and maintenance? How frequently are you looking at the performance of the organization, performance of different parts of it, that sort of energy review? And procurement is absolutely huge, kind of gets left behind a lot in many organizations. You know, we'll maybe get the most energy efficient device, maybe if we can think about it, maybe not. The procurement people kind of off in their own world in many organizations, but they need to be brought back in. And then tools at the bottom, really important. You know, Jim was mentioning one of the challenges here is what would have happened, right? So actually being able to measure your baseline's critical stuff. And then the monitoring and then the reporting, right? So here we're talking about some governance aspects, also hugely important. How frequently are reports being put out? What kind of metrics are being used? Who's looking at them? If you're falling behind in your performance, who cares? All these aspects are critically important. Let's see. So I've put together a checklist here. I'm not going to talk about it. I probably have like 3 minutes left or something. 5. Okay. Let's see. Is there anything here I really want to focus on? We use this all the time. It may be a bit tired, but it's nonetheless something that I continue to be amazed by the way objectives are set in organizations, right? So what is this SMART? It's specific, measurable. These A&Rs often used in different ways. I like to think of assignable, like can anybody take ownership of this particular objective? Realistic, in other words, can you achieve it? And time-bound, it's going to be done by a certain date. So that whole idea of a SMART objective, it's been out there for a long time. People have used this concept. I still am amazed by people who say, we're going to achieve 2% energy efficiency. When? Oh, not sure. What's it based on? Like, you know, is it based on last year, next year? Oh, I don't know, right? Who owns the goal? Who owns this objective? Not sure, really. Kind of an organizational piece, you know, we'll figure it out. So you see that kind of thing all the time. Again, I'm not going to run through all of these. There's a lot of different aspects here, but I think it's really important. Probably the biggest item that we work with all the time here is the executive sponsor. There has to be somebody in the organization who's going to take on this role of driving energy performance in the organization. It's just absolutely critical. I'm seeing some nodding heads here. There's probably some other people who are thinking, oh, we don't really have that person, right? So that's another issue. I'm going to whiz through here. So I've just, you know, this is an interesting, this is a classic case. So this is a national financial services organization that we did some work with. So they said, all right, we've got this goal, 25% CO2 reduction by 2020. And budget reduction, budget limitations. Fantastic. How are you going to get there? No idea, really, right? So the team is saying, we've been told we're going to get to this goal. We don't really know how to do it. And we've got so many different places to invest our money, right? This organization has got branches, they've got big office campuses, they've got large data centers, all sorts of different parts of their portfolio. How they're going to get there, not clear. So really what they needed was some kind of strategic plan. And now we're working with them on implementation of that plan, right? Who's accountable? How often are they reporting? What metrics are they using? What are their leading metrics? What are their lagging metrics? How are they actually producing these reports? What do they do when something goes wrong? Is 5%, you know, how do you sort of have control limits about energy usage in all of these different facilities? How does it manifest itself at the branch level? How does it manifest itself at the data center level and so on? I have 2 minutes, fantastic. But we do recognize that all of this takes time, right? And so we start to helping people think about their level of maturity in this area, right? There's a whole area of maturity, the sort of maturity matrix idea came out of Carnegie Mellon. Some software companies are using it here, locally. This idea of, if I'm developing a game app for my phone, it's a rather different level of sophistication than I need if I'm developing software that's going to be used in well, really blank. In space, right? I mean, in a rocket or something out in space that they could be off completely out of communication. So if the software fails, that's a disaster, right? We've seen these kind of software failures in NASA and so forth. So they really need to be out here in terms of software development. The game app doesn't really care. If the game goes down, they'll fix it. Probably not that important to most people. Well, not to me, but some people maybe. And then you see people who are kind of moving up this, and this same kind of maturity idea is applying in energy management. So it's really helpful for people to say, I'm here. I'm actually okay being here, but I'd like to get to here. I don't need to get to here right now, right? So this idea of being able to take your energy management expertise, assign yourself a maturity, and determine where you want to go has been incredibly helpful. So I just end with this particular question for those of you who are sort of energy efficiency practitioners. If you left your job tomorrow, would your organization continue to see results? In other words, are you resilient, right? Do you have a program that is not dependent on any one individual, but is actually able to persist regardless of who's in charge? So thanks very much. I'll pass this over to Bill.
This guy, right? Thank you. The forward button is just the left one. That was great. So, Jim, I understand now why we fit the way we do in this panel. The big picture, obviously, energy efficiency is cool and is making things happen. And essentially what I will talk through right now could easily be a type of case study that Richard would recognize. So I think we can have a lively dialogue, because what I'll talk to you about today is how at Microsoft we've operationalized energy efficiency. And when you talk about executive sponsorship, it's bleeding off the bottom of the slide, but the executive sponsor right now at the highest level for driving energy efficiency in the company is our CEO. So Satya Nadella, our relatively new CEO over this last year, has really embraced what we've been doing for years in the company in terms of driving energy efficiency. And what's driving energy efficiency in what we like to think is almost a radical approach to it is the way that Microsoft has adopted a global strategy for being carbon neutral. So Microsoft has been running a carbon neutral business operation for 3 full years at this point, since we're just closing the end of our current fiscal year, FY15. Our year end is June 30. So we started this at the July 1 at the beginning of fiscal year 2012. So I'm really proud of the fact that we've completed 3 years of being a carbon neutral operation. This is all our data centers, all our facilities, all our global operations. So this isn't a US-centric point of view. This is a global point of view on energy management. I might be missing. There we go. So when you look at the results of driving a carbon neutral strategy, we've saved a tremendous amount of money, because if you're going to be carbon neutral, you want to squeeze energy out of every possible system you can to reduce the amount you have to invest to make up where you're not saving energy in carbon offsets, requisitions, et cetera. But as a result of this as well, we are the second largest purchaser of green power in the United States, right behind Intel. So this is EPA's ranking of green power purchasers in the United States. oddly enough, I think there's several a bunch of technology companies in the top 10. I think we, as a technology segment, dominate the top 10 in terms of purchasing green power. Intel is way out in front. Microsoft, because of the way their operations as a manufacturing company, is going to be a lot different than ours. But at the same time, we, as a software company, and our data centers are right there at number 2. And then, interestingly enough, number 3 is Kohl's, which is running large retail operations. So it just depends on really the business personality that you have. As Richard was pointing out, what are the characteristics of your organization? So take the big picture strategy on being carbon neutral and say, okay, well, let's look at that in the context of how we've operationalized that on our campus at Puget Sound. So we like to think of our campus as a living lab. And as Margaret mentioned in the introductions, I'm very interested in smart cities. So it's taking the same concepts that we use to drive energy efficiency at scale on our campus and thinking how that scales up even further in the context of the built environment that we're dealing with in cities and what that means for us in the long run. So we're spread out across Puget Sound, roughly 150 buildings, 15 million square feet, over 500 acres. We have every kind of building management system and all the technology that you would find in any building built in the last 30 years. So that gives you an idea of the sample set that we're dealing with, because we grew very rapidly, and it took us a while to get a standard spec in place. So we really, as a result, have a mix of everything, which is part of addressing the problem. We have a 100 megawatt peak. We're the largest customer for Puget Sound Energy, which is the utility. And we have a $60 million annual spend on our campus. This doesn't include our data center operations, which is a separate number, but that is paying a rate that's about a third of what we pay here in California. So energy is very inexpensive and very clean, by the way. Up in Washington, it's mostly hydro that we're consuming through PSC. So our approach to buildings is pretty much where most people understand smart buildings to be headed. We understand that buildings are really a collection of systems, and that there's a tremendous amount of data moving through these systems already. And the real challenge is, how do you look at all of the data holistically? So you can obviously, the elevators are consuming lighting and the air conditioning systems, but how those systems are performing are different depending on what kind of business you're in, where you're located. So you often hear people say, well, no two buildings are alike, and that's really true because they're driven not only by where they are and what function they're filling, but who's occupying them. So actually running a really smart building takes a lot of understanding about exactly what you're supposed to accomplish in that building. So I think it's come up already, but we've determined that energy efficiency really isn't sexy, right? So when I put this slide up here just to demonstrate a point. This is a standard piece of HVAC equipment. There's an air handling unit through the ceiling in this building, and most of us think of that as pretty much a dumb device. And in many ways it is. But those are all data points, sensors that are built into these systems today as they ship. So there's a lot of data in existing equipment. That's something we forget, and I am not personally a proponent of saying you have to add a lot of sensors or do a lot of retrofit to achieve energy efficiency. The reality is you don't. I'd say as organizations, none of us are really fully utilizing the data that we have available to us, and that's because it's complicated to get your hands on the data. So running energy efficiency at scale, in our opinion, has a lot to do with how you manage and organize the data around the systems you're running. Now, the caveat is we're a software company. So obviously we're going to look at things through that lens and say, look, the data is everything. So I don't think the data is everything, but I think the data is extremely important because it really provides significant insights and makes the visible invisible. Makes the invisible visible, pardon me. So when you look at the, I think I just made sure I didn't skip a slide. No, okay, good. So this is a dashboard used by the team that runs our real estate and facilities group. And this is what's cool about this from the facilities point of view is this is a all-up view of our campus. How am I doing time-wise? I realize.
6 minutes.
Okay, I'll move as quickly as I can. You can see the real-time demand. This is all the different, the real breakthrough here from a real estate facilities management point of view. This is all real-time data. This is data that used to be collected maybe monthly, maybe quarterly. So knowing that you're at 47 megawatts demand right now across the campus is really interesting. That you can segment the base load, plug load, and lab load for the building in real time. This brings tears to the eyes of the guy who runs our real estate and facilities because that used to take a mechanical engineer days to do that. And so the rule of thumb we have is you have to do it once, more than once, automate it. And that's what we're up to. It's a real-time demand curve, and I'll start to really move quickly. So you can drill into that data and look at the different segments. And then what's really exciting is looking at the whole campus. So you can see this is a set of buildings we're looking at. Let's see, we're looking at, this is just part of the campus that we're looking at. But when you're trying to assess the status of a large operation at a glance, this type of user interface is useful. This green color key says, well, I don't have any problems. These buildings where I see red, I know I have faults happening in those systems. So this is very different, especially in a severe weather scenario where it snows, rains, power's out. This is not that long ago. People would take clipboards. Within the last 5 years, people would take clipboards and get in trucks and drive around and see where the camps have power. Now at a glance, you don't have to be anywhere near the campus. You can tell what the utility status is, the status of your backup generation. Is the building communicating to you? What alarms do you have? An alarm is a problem that's happening right now and needs to be fixed immediately, and a fault is something that's going to fail. And this is the key. The key to making this project stick at Microsoft has been there is money in the faults. So I forgot to mention one of the key corporate sponsors. We're carbon neutral, and it took a while for our CEO to adopt that point of view. Steve Ballmer didn't adopt that immediately, but our CFO adopted it immediately. And our the initial executive sponsor for the project was the CFO, who saw this as a great risk mitigation strategy globally, because we're certain that carbon is going to be traded or taxed across the markets we're operating in. So it was good to have those smarts in place, and we would save a lot of money. So if you saw our energy spending Puget Sound, $60 million, and to put a number on it, we know we're going to save between 6 and 10% annually on that number, and that goes right to the bottom line. So CFO will sign off on that all day long. So this is an example what the faults look like. The key is we monetize those faults. So we change the way that our facilities team goes after the problem. I'll just go back 1 second. So here you can see a dollar value associated with this leak that's happening. And so instead of going and fixing the $10 problem, which might be a thermostat that's malfunctioning, you go after the $10,000 problem. Now, when you look at a large campus, and this is why it's interesting at scale, and this is why data is important, finding these problems is a data-intensive solution. So just to give you a feel for scale, our campus has roughly 40 to 50,000 of those air handlers, and that's just one piece of equipment. So having the ability to put software in place that collects that data and drives the system has really been the key to our being able to monetize energy efficiency and make it very compelling for us. This is where we're operating, and this is where we're deploying this system outside of the United States. This is obviously the rest of the world. We have big campuses in Beijing and Shanghai where energy is very expensive and there's big motivation. I thought the panel this morning was great in terms of the look forward globally on what's happening. And we don't have time today, but I wanted to point out the fact that we focused on our buildings and commercial operations. The same sort of intensity is going into the energy that we're consuming in our data centers, which is also massive. So very much in sync with the conversation, the way the panel opened. We're deep already in testing distributed generation scenarios, and we're very interested in the supply chain around energy in general. I love this particular project. This is in Cheyenne, Wyoming. It's a biogas operation. That's a data center. That's what a data center looks like today. It looks like you would see it go by, it's about the size of a 20 or 40-foot shipping container, and that's actually what it's built in these days. I don't know if a lot of people still think data centers today are buildings, air-conditioned rooms. They're sitting on concrete slabs, taking advantage of natural ventilation and climate wherever you can make that happen. In this particular operation is a pilot that's operating right now, reclaiming biogas from a water treatment plant in Cheyenne. So this is off the grid, which is the direction for, if you want a really resilient data center, you don't depend on anybody else for the power. That's the short story. Thanks.
Wow, thank you very much. That was really interesting. I'd like to encourage everyone to come up, and we have the microphone over there if you have any questions, and right on time. Well done. Okay, we have our first question here.
Sure, I have a question. Thank you. Thank you. This is Tom Geist from EPRI. This is for Jim Sweeney. I had a question. You mentioned economic energy efficiency as opposed to the physics or something like that. How do you measure that? And should that be more of a discussion for how we count our energy efficiency?
It's easier to count it in the industrial sector or the commercial sector than in the regulated utility sector. We heard two people who just said, one in general for broad, and then one specific. We're doing things because they're profitable. We've set a set of goals and recognize that those set of goals, if we make the changes, we'll make more profit because we're going to reduce the cost for what we're doing. That's the measure that I think about economically efficient. If a company that's a non-regulated make those changes and their profit can go up and they reduce the externalities associated with it, that's a payoff. Whereas harder to do is where we've had many regulation throughout the economy on energy efficiency of individual equipment. And you know, if I had an hour to give a presentation, I'd show about those. What you hope is that each one of those are based upon a change which is in fact the benefits exceed the costs of the regulations. That's the way that they're supposed to operate. Margaret Taylor can speak more to this, but in the federal government, when they go to the regulatory impact reviews, it turns out that on the whole, they turn out to be better payoffs than they thought, and you can't accept it unless it's economically efficient. So I don't know how to do it other than in a program by program area, but in many areas where either you have the rule is you can't do it unless it's economically efficient, or the corporate payoff is you're doing it because you increase more profit. That assures it's economically efficient adjustments.
So I have a question about the applicability for small to medium-sized businesses. Any ideas you have in terms of specific measuring software, dashboards, checklists would be great.
I'll mention that briefly. So
a dry cleaner, right? So somebody who's operating a dry cleaning business or a 7-Eleven, something like that, is essentially like a household. It's not really that much different. And we found that there's lots to be done in those areas. People just don't know what the options are. I think many of us probably have heard of Opower. They focus mostly on the residential sector. We actually have a group that works with utilities that focuses on the small and medium business, exactly this group that you're talking about. And it's really just sort of, there's a lot of data out there now, which is fantastic, using that data effectively with very, very targeted suggestions, right? So the 7-Eleven, you can talk about refrigeration, right? So what can you do to reduce your refrigeration costs? Don't send the refrigeration suggestions to the dry cleaner, because the dry cleaner is not really going to know what to do with them, right? So very targeted measures, understanding what the business can use. I think, and we are seeing results. We're seeing people respond very effectively to highly targeted suggestions on ways that they can reduce the cost of energy, which is not huge for them, but nonetheless, every dollar counts in a small business because it's going straight typically into the owner's pocket. Does that answer the question?
And I'll just add to that on the software side. So what I was explaining at a high level and how information moves through the dashboard and how it presents itself across something as large as a campus. There's very similar solutions and increasingly sophisticated solutions that just work with whatever data you have. And if that's just the meter data for your operation, and as Richard was pointing out, how that compares to other similar facilities, there's a tremendous amount that you can do with that data to save energy.
Very great presentations. Thank you very much. So, Bill, I have a question for you. You mentioned that you were expecting 6 to 10% savings. Is that the economically viable savings, or what have you seen so far in your history?
So that is a very accurate number of what we're saving, and for energy, that's as I understand it. And so I've only been working on this for 5 years, so I always consider myself the most ignorant energy person in the room. So there's a bunch of people here who know a lot more about energy savings and efficiency than I do. But 6 to 10% is a really solid number. And to Jim's point, what that means in terms of dollars is really significant, because the return on our investment is excellent. It's way under the hurdle rate. We're in an 18 to 24 month return on that, on what we invest to drive energy efficiency. Sorry, I left out that detail. The ROI is really strong, and belabor it, but that's in a market where energy is really inexpensive. The Puget Sound example. So if we felt that we could be energy efficient in Puget Sound and make it work economically, that the case in the rest of the world is really strong too.
And what you've seen is, before the energy prices got expensive, before the energy crisis, that was exactly why nobody was paying attention to energy. There was no payoff for focusing on it. You can get a payoff on everything else. We've had this discontinuity where it's been 40 years now of discontinuity, but a significant change. So now people are discovering and innovating in ways that it becomes profitable. But if you have a publicly traded company and the CEO says, I want energy efficiency, but it's going to cost me to do this, it's to reduce the profitability, they're going to have stockholder suits against them. They're going to be whacked by a lot of people, and the CEO isn't going to stay there for a long time as CEO. So what we're seeing across the United States is some companies, as Richard said, are best in class about what they're doing. And some are just learning, and that's why we're getting a continuing process, because many companies are moving up that chain, learning more and more about doing it, but really just choosing those things, for the most part, that they find is profitable, because, particularly if they're publicly traded, they have a fiduciary responsibility to try to maximize profit.
I have a follow-up question with Richard. Richard, you probably have done many, many buildings in terms of energy efficiency retrofits. Do you see economic viable potential to be about 6 to 10%, or your studies have shown a different number?
Should be higher.
You know, I mean, I'd love to give you a number. I don't think I have a number, simply because every building is going to be different, right? So predicting the return from the problem is that I could say, yeah, retrofits are easily returning 25% savings in energy expenditure. And then you say, okay, well, what kind of buildings are you talking about? Oh, well, I was talking about 100-year-old buildings with single pane glass and no building management system, no controls. So that's where we really saw the change, right? And then you might say, well, okay, but that's not my building. What about sort of a fairly modern 20-year-old building here in Silicon Valley? That, you know, so it's really hard to come up with a particular number there. I just want to add one thing to what Bill was saying in response to your sort of economically viable question. I get a sense underlying your question is this issue of people pursuing energy projects for non-financial returns, right? So is and you know, you're saying Microsoft, is Microsoft pursuing projects for the glory, not for the money, effectively, right? For being able to say we're doing great stuff on carbon, but not actually achieving cost savings. I think that's the underlying, perhaps. Was that underlying your question? No. Oh, okay. All right. Then I won't bother to. No. Okay. So I would say, you know, the thing about it is, first of all, we've seen, particularly in industrial facilities, when you're working, when you propose an energy project, people zero in on the dollars in a way that's actually sort of unproductive to the discussion, where they might not zero in on the dollars when other investments for other reasons are being proposed, production efficiency, for example, right? And yet we consistently see that when you actually are doing these kinds of energy efficiency investments, what you're also seeing is reductions in maintenance costs that are often not necessarily included, improvement in equipment life that wasn't necessarily thought about, right? You're also seeing typically much better fault resilience than you had before, which leads to improved productivity in all manner of operations, which are not really thought about, right? So there's also typically safety improvements, particularly when you've got lighting upgrades and so forth. So I think those, you know, while Bill is sensibly saying, you know, we're investing in this way, and I'm sure there's a lot of control options that you're taking advantage of, which are kind of low cost in some regards, right? Yeah. Nonetheless, the results that you're seeing won't just appear in your energy, in your utility costs, right? The results will be seen in multiple ways. You mentioned, you know, truck drive, having to do truck rolls. Yeah, the whole thing. Yeah. Okay.
One really important point I left out, and it shows my focus on, okay, it's technology, it's software. We haven't done the behavior, we haven't implemented a big behavior change program yet. And we think we're going to push the number closer to 20% when we engage aggressively. Microsoft people in general, not to, well, okay, I'll generalize. It's a corporate culture embraces sustainability. So there's a built-in awareness, but we don't have any visibility in our buildings. There's no monitors saying you're saving energy, this and that. None of it's, people walk around campus, most of the people don't know we're running the project I explained to you. But we plan to roll it out and drive the behavior side of it as well, which we believe will really push the number, because the behavior is a huge part. Sorry.
Ellen.
Don't say sorry. Ellen Petrol from EPRI. So I have a proposal that actually came out of Jim's point and Tom's question. That what if we flipped around the whole utility measurement from energy saved, or the but-for issue, and which is the issue of what's the baseline and then how do you measure it, which costs a lot of money. How about if we flipped it all around to improving the productivity of businesses and in reducing the costs or improving the productivity of residential, organizations too, residential customers. What do you think?
Well, actually, see, I think that's what's been happening. I think throughout, there's a limited number of companies that really are focusing on energy per se. For most of the companies, they're asking how to be productive, how to get more dollars revenue for the cost that we spend. And that is an issue of productivity. So when the companies over this 40 years have been innovating, energy is, in the past, energy was not one of the elements of what they paid attention to for productivity. Now, with the attention on energy and the cost of energy, it's one of many things that they look at. And the fact that it's now one of many things in pushing for productivity is what over time has led to this several percentage points a year, making such a fundamental difference, like, the children growing example over that time. So I think a lot of the regulatory discussion has turned to how do you reduce the use of energy? I think the way that most companies are operating is, how do we get profitable? How do we be productive in the use of resources? And that's why energy is changing as much as it is. It was very different from the regulatory perspective, which is a problem about the regulatory perspective, maybe.
Well, great. Well, I really hate to break this up because I think we're getting into some really interesting questions. I have like 3 other ones that I'd ask if I had a chance right now. But why don't we take a break? We've got a chance, hopefully, to see these guys during the day and talk to them during the break. This is 11:25. It's the end of our session. Let's give everybody a hand. I think it was a really interesting session.
Thank you. Thank you.